All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today with Miss Joelle Farrar, and I have to say the name right. Joelle, I'm going to get started by telling how you and I met. I like to start with telling how we all met. Let me just start by saying to anybody out there, parents, advocates, anybody that I've worked with in a personal or professional way, you have Joelle to blame. Joelle is who created this monster. Joelle and I met, and I'm thinking back, Connor was probably 3, not quite 3, was he?
No, he was older. I think he was a little bit older than that. I'm thinking
Okay.
it was around 2009 or 2010.
Okay.
Somewhere in that time frame, yeah.
Let's see. It would have been, somewhere in there. And and the only reason I say that is because I couldn't remember if you were his very first speech path, but I don't think you were. I think you were his second.
I think I was the second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when my wife said, "You're taking Connor to the speech path today," I said, "Okay." And I show up and we meet. And I got to tell you, at first I thought, this lady, what is she doing? Because she spent the entire time. Now Connor is on the floor, and I'm going to tell this story, and then I'm gonna explain. I tell people this because it's amazing. You're one of the most, if not the most amazing speech path I've ever witnessed, and I mean that. He's had some great speech paths after. Don't get me wrong, but nothing like this. So I'm sitting in the office, and the whole time she's telling me, "Now, did you know you can do this?" And she's pulling books out, and she's pulling out papers, and she's just all over the place, and she's handing me this stack of homework for when we leave. And I'm sitting here going, "Are you not gonna, don't you need to interact with my son?" Which she was. Don't get me wrong, she was, but it was more of him playing on the floor. And I thought, what? And then at the end, she says, "Now, did you notice that he did this, this, and this?" And she's telling me everything that she's actually working with him on. And she was talking to, she was interacting, don't get me, but it was like, when we left, she said, "Now, when you go home, you need to work on those things too." She and gives me this list along with this stack of books and papers. And
I did. I remember that.
And I was like, what am I doing? And I walked out of there going, that was amazing. It really was, because it was just, I had no idea what was going on. It was one of those things that it took me a while for it to process. And then I thought, okay, this kid, he's going to be okay, and so that's where we kind of got started. A couple of visits later.
Some of that. Yeah.
So a couple visits later, and she says, "You need to go to Partners in Policy Making. You need to be an advocate." And I thought, this lady's crazy. There's no way that I could do this. And here we are. And you are the reason why I do what I do.
You know what, Cody, knowing you, I will take full responsibility for that. You give me the kudos for that. I will take that. That's okay. Absolutely. So, absolutely.
Well, and I thank you, because I don't know what you saw in me as opposed to anybody else, but I do know that you were pushing me, and I was kicking and screaming the whole time. So,
for everybody watching, when he says pushing him, not only did I keep telling him that, I handed him the phone number, I handed him the email, I gave him the application, and I said, "And by the way, I've already told the ladies at Partners in Policy Making that you're applying for next year's class."
Yeah.
I didn't give you an out. You an out.
No, it was all or nothing. We were in, but no, I'm glad we did. Looking at this, Connor's now, he just turned 15.
I saw that. I couldn't believe it. It's like, wow.
He is. He'll be a sophomore in high school next year. So that's it's crazy.
Yeah.
So tell me, I want to start. I usually start with how you got with your story, but tell everybody kind of what you've been doing, because do you do the speech path still?
I do a little bit of everything right now. My official titles right now are speech language pathologist, board certified behavior analyst. I'm also a presenter with a nationwide group called PESI. They're a nonprofit providing resources to families and therapists, rehab, all these different aspects. They cover the gambit. And I was honored enough that they invited me to come be one of their speakers. And so I travel quite a bit around the country and speak to all these different organizations in my spare time, in addition to my full-time jobs. And yes, I said jobs, plural. And I go around speaking and I talk about autism and behavior and the interactions of autism and behavior with communication. And I guess that goes back to how I got to where I am and what I'm doing. I think I always knew I wanted to work in the disability field. I remember I could have been more than 10 years old, and I met a very distant cousin who was hearing impaired, and he was trying to sign, and nobody in the family except one person knew sign. And that stuck with me throughout my life and my practice, is that how is that affecting that person? He can't talk to anybody in his family. He's just so isolated. And I think that always stuck with me. And I think that may have been one of the guiding factors to how I ended up becoming a speech pathologist. And I do tell the story to people, and they laugh at how I got to where I am now. You know, Cody's story, I'll take the blame for Cody's story, but my story is a little bit different. I was a speech pathologist, and I am from Oklahoma, so I speak y'all's language, so I can say y'all without y'all being offended. Trust me, I'm in Illinois, guys. It's totally different world here. And as a speech pathologist in small town Oklahoma, what I found was that if you were in a town or a county or several counties, you were probably the only speech pathologist. So some days I would go into a school district and work until 3 o'clock. I would leave that school district and go do home health in the surrounding towns. Or if there was a nursing home, I was working in the nursing home also. And so, you know, I did a little bit of it all. And I was introduced to DDS, Department of Developmental Disability Services there in Oklahoma, and started working with some of the adults with disabilities. And I got to tell you guys, that was a different world. And it was something that really drove a passion in me when I saw that nobody wanted to work with some of the populations that I was working with. Even in graduate school, it seems like I was always steered towards the clients that everybody else had a hard time working with, either because of behavior or what they deemed inappropriateness. And I was in there with my first student coming out with a black eye, and my friend that I commuted with came out with this cute little girl working on her S's and R's. And here I come out with this young man with autism with a black eye from therapy sessions. So I always knew that I was going to do different types of therapy. So when I would be in these small towns and I would end up with these really unique cases, it was really challenging me. And I always wanted to learn more and just learn more and how to help those people. So I always went above and beyond these continuing education classes because I wanted to know more. So I was always reading and researching. And one week while I was at a school in Okemah, Oklahoma, I was approached by several people, and they said, "Hey, our full-time speech therapist is leaving. We would like you to apply for the full-time job." And I was kind of shocked, going, "Wow, a full-time job in one location? Wow, that's kind of cool." So I went over and met with the superintendent, talked to him, and as I left, he says, after we'd agreed, "Yeah, I'd take the job." He says, "Hey, and by the way, we want you to be our special education director." Well, at the time, it wasn't that big of a deal because they were part of a co-op and had been for decades, I believe. And so I thought, hey, this will be easy breezy. And then I find out, yeah, he was sneaky. And then I find out he wants to pull out of the co-op and he wants me to transition everybody out. So here I am, a speech pathologist. I've got all these unique experiences, but now I'm going to be in charge of a self-sustained special education program that this school district hasn't had in decades. So I started training and going to every training that we could find in Oklahoma. The school district even sent me out of state, which they don't send people out of state very often. In small town Oklahoma, you don't go out of state for trainings, but they sent me to these specialized trainings so that we could set up these programs to be effective for people in the area and the community. And so I became certified in special education and became a special education teacher in addition to speech pathology. And then I got my administration certification because I felt like if I was going to be supervising people, I needed to be able to do so in an effective manner. So as I was there for several years, I learned what I didn't know because I didn't know what I didn't know, and got to learning more and more about the behavioral aspect of what we were doing. And it just was such a challenge for me. And I just really was drawn to how the communication and the behavior interacted and intersected and how that affected people outside of the therapy session and outside of the classroom, and how is that affecting them in their community? What were we doing about it in the community? Because sure, I can teach you to say words in a speech therapy session, but how is that translating to what you need outside of there? I left Okima schools. I can't remember the year even now at this point, but when my father passed away, I left the schools. I moved back home to Wilburton, closer to Leflore County, and I was there for a little while, and then took a job over in Leflore County at the health department, which is where I met Cody and Connor and their family. And while I was there, I learned about the advocacy training program, Partners in Policymaking. And I will tell anybody who's listening, if you've never been, check it out. I'm a proponent of it, and I talk about it nationwide about the developmental disability councils. While I was in Partners in Policymaking, I kept learning what I didn't know, because I didn't know what I needed to be asking about. I didn't know all of these different aspects. And I will tell you, I have a note on my bulletin board up here from Erin. Still, it was the little note that she wrote us the last week of class. And I still keep that up on my bulletin board as kind of an inspiration for what I do. And while I was there, I met a gentleman named Mike Mayer. Mike Mayer was there talking to us about dual diagnosis. He was talking about people who have mental health issues and behavioral issues in addition to an intellectual disability. As we talked and interacted throughout the day, we talked more and more. Mike made the mistake of sitting down with me at lunch one day at our table. He sits down and we're talking, and I just looked at him and started talking to him about his project and started watching him. He was working in Illinois, helping adults with disabilities move out of institutions into the community. Some of these people had been there since they were 4 and 6 years old, and here they were 50 and 60 years old moving into their own homes for the first time ever. I looked at Mike at one point and just said, "You need to take me on the road with you." It was kind of snarky, kind of tongue-in-cheek. Mike turns to me and says, "We're hiring." I said, "Great." He said, "Here's my number. When do you want to start?" That's literally how I interviewed for the job. I called my husband on the way home and said, "I'm going to take a job and I'm going to fly in and out to Illinois." And I met this guy and I started telling him all about this. And my husband says, "Yeah, whatever. Well, I'll talk to you when you get home." Because it was like a 3-hour drive from Oklahoma City to Wilburton. I go to work the next day. I start telling my clients, like Cody and Jennifer, that I was leaving, that I was taking this great new job. I gave my resignation. I came home and told my husband, "Okay, here's the date I start." And he says, "Wait a minute, you were serious?" And I said, yeah. He says, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well," and I started telling him about the project. He says, "I get what the project is, but what are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." He says, "How much are you going to make?" And I said, "I don't know." And I felt that passionate about it that I hadn't even asked those questions about what they needed of me. I started in May of 2012, flying in and out to Illinois to help with this project. And I worked on the positive behavior support team and worked on with communication disorders and stuff to help develop programs for these people to be able to move into the community. I also worked with the people in their homes in the community when they were having problems. And again, though, what I found out is I didn't know what I didn't know, and figured out, you know what, if I'm going to support people on a bigger scale, I need to know more. So here I go again, and I go back and I get another certification, and I became a board certified behavior analyst. And from there, that led me to where I'm at today, where I am working in an area here in Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, where I am able to support people to be able to function more independently, even though they have diagnoses such as autism and Down syndrome, CP or whatever, and they have those behaviors that everybody else said, "Oh, they can't live in the community, they can't live on their own, they can't do this because they have this." And I'm finding that, guess what? They're all wrong. And it was like throwing a challenge to me, telling me that these people couldn't live in the community. And guess what? They are. As a matter of fact, I have a team meeting tomorrow on a gentleman who was in institutions. I think he was 6 years old when his family placed him in an institution, and he's in his early 60s now. He moved into a group home in 2013 or early 2014, and he's been there ever since. So I've been with him all those years. And does it give him a hard time? Absolutely. Is there any possibility of him ever going back to an institution? Not a chance. He is successful in the community. Even with his high level of needs and behavioral issues, there are ways we can support them. And so I find that I'm advocating for those type things through my job. And even when I'm not working with a client, I still get called to come in and advocate in school districts. And I advocate for family members with people with disabilities trying to get services. And I think I just do a little bit of it all. And I do, because I feel like if there's a need and I have a voice to give, it's a waste of those skills that I have not to be providing that support for people.
Yeah, you're a lot like what I say. I always tell people that number one, I'm plugging holes. Whatever I can,
Yeah.
when I find a need, how can we fill that need? And then the other part of that is I'll talk to anybody that wants to listen, and I'll talk to you. Shut me up. So.
And I think that's why you and I got along so well, is because you didn't shut me up ever.
No, well, but you had a lot, and especially for what I call a newly diagnosed parent, just receiving that diagnosis, and I was just coming out of the denial stage.
Yeah.
And so I was absorbing everything that I could get, and you just had it. I mean, you were just giving it to me too. So it was, we worked well at that time, because it was just what I needed.
And I think you made it easy because you realized you needed more. And when you were open to saying, hey, I need more, it made it easier for me to say, hey, here's what I know. You don't have to take what I know and use it, but if you listen to it, you might glean a few gemstones out of what's there that might work for your family.
Yeah. Something you told me that I use in my trainings. I always tell people that I went into you may or may not remember, I went into you and you said something along the lines of, well, what do you want to work on? What do you need? And I said, well, Connor doesn't do what I tell him to when I ask him to. And you said, and I'm paraphrasing all of this, but you said something along the lines of, well, how long do you give him? Well, my dad was, you do what you're told when you're told. I mean, that was, and you just laughed at me and said, that's not going to happen. So one of the things that you said was count to 15, give them some time to process the information. And that's one thing we still use in our trainings today, because I think that was, now that doesn't mean that I've gotten any better over the years with my patients. But at least I know how to tell other people,
That's right. Hey, it's do as I say, not as I do, right?
Okay. Yeah. My trainings, I tell them, look, I'm not the perfect parent, but I can sit here and tell you how to do this, but to put it in action is harder with your own child than it is with.
It absolutely is. And I have a child who has a diagnosis. It's not autism, but it's something that does relate well to autism. And so I've been in the trenches with people. I have other family members with disabilities that I've had to be in the trenches with. So the fact that I've walked in your shoes, maybe not your actual diagnosis, but I've walked in your shoes. And I think that does make a difference from me just being somebody who went to school because I was going to help all the cute little kids with autism. And I don't mean anything negative to those people who that is their passion and that's what they want to do. But I think I do have a different perspective on it, unless you've sat across the table in an IEP meeting and been frustrated with what you're being told, you can't understand that agony and that frustration and that mama bear instinct that comes out that, no, we're not doing this. This is what my child needs and we're going to fight for it, So until you've been on that side of the table, you really can't understand that experience, I don't think, in the same manner.
Yeah, and you and I have been in the IEPs together in the trenches. Those were fun. That was before I knew what I was doing in an IEP, and so it was good to have somebody like you there. And that's what I try to do that now, because that's my job, is to go into IEPs and advocate, and I take a lot of the stuff that I learned from you. So again, I appreciate that. But
thank you.
Tell me about some of your mentors. I know we have a lot of the same, but I think there's some different.
I will tell you that when I think about it, my mentors, when I got into the true advocacy part of it, were the same people that you're talking about. We're talking about Ann and Diane and Aaron and Wanda and Jan Randall and all of those people that were there at Partners in Policymaking truly were. You know, getting to do some of the things that we've gotten to do, like going to the Williams and Mary Law School's Institute for Special Education and Advocacy, that was amazing. But I will tell you that some of the biggest mentors that I've had have been other parents of children with disabilities. I remember one of my first jobs in a school district, and it was one of those where I went to several school districts. A parent came in and she was fired up and she was mad. She was actually a grandparent raising her grandchildren. And she came in talking about, she was going to this training, and it was Sharon House putting on the training. If you've never been to listen and talk to it with Sharon House, it was fun. But this parent was throwing out Sharon's House name like, hey, you should be intimidated. I'm going to go talk to Sharon House and we're going to get things fixed. And I asked her, I said, well, tell me about this. What is this? Because I knew nothing about it. And the grandparent told me about it. And I said, well, do you care if I come? And that changed our relationship. But by doing that, she started mentoring me on her frustrations and why it was so hard for her to work with the school district. And this was before I had my youngest daughter, who I've had to be on the other side of the table from. And I remember that grandparent. And then I remember another parent who had a child with autism with some pretty significant issues. And he had failed a kindergarten program because he didn't like to color. And the school district taught this young man sign language. It was great. They were teaching him sign language. I thought that was awesome. By the time he came to me, he had been taught more, please, thank you, and I think red balloon. Those were the signs he used consistently used those signs. Well, he didn't like to color, and the teacher decided she was done with the mom telling her that he didn't like to color and he was going to do what everybody else did in the class. And so she leans around him, puts her hand over hand, which he also didn't like. He has no communication system, basically, and he broke the teacher's nose. And so he failed the program and they were kicking him out of school and all of these things. So by the time he came to me, the mom had learned her stuff. She knew what she needed. And when she approached me and we started talking, I found that she was able to share things from a different perspective also about the communication and the behavior and respecting that person's rights, respecting that person as a unique individual, because that young man had preferences that nobody was respecting. And if you were not respecting his preferences and boundaries, you were the problem. And so those are two of the parents that I found were some of the biggest influences on me and mentored me. And then I was able to turn it around and help mentor them through the years also. So I found that was really interesting, that I was able to, as a professional, I had the training, I had the background. So I was the one with the knowledge base. I should be going in here and doing this. But here are these two parents in rural Oklahoma who are telling me, hey, that's not what we need. We need you to listen to what we need and what our kids need. And I felt like in the beginning, those were some of the biggest influences on me. And then after I got into Partners in Policymaking and opening up that whole world of advocates and these people who live and breathe advocacy, it was just amazing. So that's how I can identify my mentors.
That's great. I always tell, I learned, besides the mentors that I've had on here, just parents that have been through it are the ones that probably taught me more than anything. And I still learn from them. I only know as far as Connor's been. Beyond that, I don't know. Transition is, we've learned a little bit more because we've been working with some students on transition. But again, as a parent, I only know as far as my son has gone. So that's, listening to those people. And then now we've started the social groups and working with the transitioning teens. I learned so much more from them than they'll ever learn from me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you talk about that, I have a few particular clients that I work with now that I feel like they may have taught me a few things. And I'll be honest, guys, I've been in the field for over 20 years. I don't have to tell how long. We don't have to discuss that. But I have a young man that I work with right now. He's in his mid-20s, nonverbal, has autism, and he's hilarious, but he can be a stinker too. But he's coming in and teaching me iPad things and why I need to know more technology. You know, everybody says, oh, well, we need technology and we need this and we need that. This young man is teaching me why it's important and why it's important for him, which I thought was really unique. It wasn't just for a communication device. It was, that is his world. That's what's important to him. And so learning that from a different perspective, not from a parent, but from the individual, is pretty awesome. I will tell you guys that we're trying to get him a communication device or a new upgraded version, and he has FaceTime on his iPad. And so recently, because of the COVID, I FaceTimed with him and his mom. And he now FaceTimes me about once a week at about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Looks at me for a minute, says, oh, KSR. Basically, he looks at me and hangs up. So he's just making sure I'm still there. That's what it is. So.
That's interesting. Two-part question. What advice do you give to parents? You know, what's kind of your go-to advice, and then what is the best advice you think you've ever received?
My go-to advice for parents and family members, because you know we have a lot of people involved that aren't just parents. We got grandparents, aunts, uncles raising them. Is understand what you want may not be what they want. It may not be what the person you're supporting needs. You know, understanding that they are a person separate from you. What I want for my daughter is not what she wants out of her life, you know, and it's one of the hardest things as a parent to accept. Even if they have a disability, you want to protect them and take care of them, but understanding and respecting them as a individual is hard. I think it's hard for any parent, but particularly when they have a disability. And that's one of my go-to advices, I think. And the best advice I think I ever got, again, it goes back to partners in policy making, because I do reference this sometimes. I remember somebody having difficulty, and my first response was to jump in and fix it for them and make it better. And I remember Erin telling me, she needs to learn to do it for herself. You're doing her no favors by doing it for her. And okay, she's right. You know, that was my job, was to fix it. I'm a fixer, but Erin told me that, and I do use that a lot too. So, and you know, Erin, she'll tell you what you need. And I think that was pretty impressive, especially because I can be a little assertive, we'll say, and Erin has no problem saying, nope, this is what you need to do, Joelle. And so I have to respect somebody who can stand toe to toe with me and tell me, you know what, you're wrong, and not just pacify me for what they think I need to hear. So, and I think that was good advice, is that everybody needs to learn to advocate for themselves. You can be their voice and assist them, but you shouldn't take it over and do all the advocacy, or they're never going to learn it for themselves.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that goes into, it's great for advocacy, but it's also great for, well, kind of when we talk to educators, one of the first things I say is, I ask how many people are paras in the room, and then I tell them
Mm-hmm.
that their job is to work themselves out of a job, and they look at me like I'm crazy, and I say,
Absolutely.
but you want the child to be as independent as possible. So your
Mm-hmm.
job is not to do everything for them. Your job is to help them be able to do everything for themselves. And once they realize that, and then I tell them, look, you get done with this one, there'll be a next one coming up the pike. Don't worry, you'll have a job.
You're always going to have work.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
but
That's
yeah,
great advice. I agree. Yeah.
yeah. So, but it goes along that same lines. Don't, we have to, and I always tell people too, like with Connor, I want, and I don't want this to sound bad, but people will get it. I want my son to fail. We failed in life. He's not going to do everything perfect, but he's got to try. And then when I realize
Mhm.
what he can or can't do, then we can move on from there. But I've got to let him try it himself. I'm going to get in trouble for this one, but my wife's a bit of an enabler. So
Sorry,
uh,
Jen.
yeah, but and so we butt heads on things, but I really try to make him do as much as he can for himself, and I think that's one of the things that I think I learned from you, a roundabout way.
It's hard. It is hard to do. I think that is one of the hardest things as parents to do. Yeah, I can come at that from personal experience. I want to jump in and save my daughter, but you know what? Sometimes you gotta sit back and let her fall on her hiney, and then come back and say, okay, what can you do to fix it? Can you make it better? Is it worth making it better? Is it really that important to you that you need to make it better?
Yeah,
That's the other thing. Is it really? Is it really? If it's not, okay. Well, we learned that's not that important. Let's move on to something else.
right. That's all I've got. And that takes up our time for the day. But I want to say, first and foremost, that I am so appreciative of you and what you have done for everyone, but especially for me, pushing me to be an advocate and to do the things that I'm doing. And I honestly, and I say this, I know this is going to sound cheesy. I don't know where I would be without Joelle Farrar telling me, you need to do this, and me, instead of like I normally would say, oh, okay, whatever, I actually followed through on it, and that's why I'm here. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was an honor for you to invite me to speak, especially with all the other people that you've had on here. That's like that. I kind of feel like I'm way out of my league on that stuff. So it was pretty amazing. So
Not at
thanks so
all.
much.
Not at all.